Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
Governor Wes Moore gave his first State of the State address. The Delaware GOP pushes back on plans for electric cars. We'll have a reaction to the police beating death of Tyree Nichols and a long goodbye in the interview with the former mayor of Salisbury, Jake Day. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. In the studio this afternoon is Greg Bassett. He's editor and general manager of the Salisbury Independent. And with us by phone later on is Susan Canfor, a Coastal Point reporter and also contributor to the Independent. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Don.
So in the governor's State of the State address, he's certainly emphasized public service. Here's just a piece of what he had to say.
This is a state where opportunities are boundless, but the challenges are undeniable. It's also a state where there is no obstacle that we cannot address, no challenge that we cannot tackle if we are intentional, if we move in partnership. And promoting a state of service is how we are going to do that. You know, I only realized recently that service, the word service, actually comes from the Latin word servitium, which means slavery. So it's fitting as the first African American in the state of Maryland to deliver this speech. And as the first African American to deliver this speech, standing in a building that was built by the hands of enslaved people, that we are now putting service towards the good of all. The irony is that it's service that will help save us.
So, Greg, what do we make of the governor's first address?
Yeah, the reviews were absolutely amazing. He brought an energy to that address that had been lacking for a really, really long time based on the reviews. Solidly, people were very impressed with what he said. And the service aspects, I had not really thought of it the way that he articulated it. But then when you dig into the details and some of what he said, you do see public service all the time around us. One thing as the editor of a newspaper, I see how all the nonprofits and volunteers work to help in the school system, in the service clubs, to help make the community better. There are people engaged in service everywhere, whether it's the Rock-A-Walkin' pies that they're selling or people volunteering to help with the Boy Scouts, whatever it is. There's service going on everywhere. And just the idea of instilling this from a governmental level and encouraging it, I think is really amazing. It reminded me of George Bush's 1,000 Points of Light, where he tried to honor people who did that. But this is a much more involved way in which you count on the public to solve a lot of the problems that government can't.
One of the things also that struck me was this call for ending child poverty in the state of Maryland. Obviously, he's talking about extending some tax breaks, but he seems to want to go further than that.
Yeah, if you look at all the dynamics in terms of this argument, we learned it from the pandemic and the labor shortage that we have now. You see how child care is essential in the formula of every family. So there are families the mothers or fathers can't work because they're involved in child care or they're in child care at home. If there was some sort of public child care, they could go out and they can contribute economically and perhaps grow themselves in terms of income. And solve a lot of this problem in terms of childhood poverty. He was very articulate about that and made it a priority, is going to make it a priority. It'll be interesting to see what kind of programs he can get behind to do this.
And finally, in terms of the Republican response, it seemed almost small, obviously, compared to being in a large room like that. And more called for like ending this bickering, this political partisanship. I didn't get a sense that was going to go anywhere soon.
Yeah, the official response was actually recorded before his speech based on the draft of the speech. So when the Republicans made their official response, they didn't have the emotion that he was able to transmit within that chamber. I did talk to one of our local lawmakers last night about another issue and asked about the speech. And it came back to me, it was reported back to me that, it was surprising that they were really kind of caught off on the back of their heels because they didn't expect such a dynamic address. They didn't expect an emotional presentation. They didn't expect to be affected by it. They thought they could be more cynical in reaction. So in the moment, they were caught up like everyone else would have been human-wise. But in the end, it's like, all right, these are all great ideas. We can all get behind these ideas, but how are we going to pay for it? How's it going to work? Is that really what you want to do? Some of the typical reactions that you would expect.
I want to turn to the Ward Museum. Apparently the building has some serious heating, ventilation, and air conditioning problems. The gallery's been closed down. Where are we at this point? Do you know?
Yeah, so there's a rumor in town. Was a situation with the Ward Museum last summer where some mold was found within the museum. There had been a failure of the HVAC systems. They had to relocate a lot of the inventory, things that had been loaned there. They returned them to the artist. It looks like it's going to be the director has left. They have not hired a permanent new director yet. But there's a lot of rumors in town about what's going to happen to the Ward Museum. There's a lot of concern about that. A lot of people don't want to see the change. So one of the rumors, and we haven't been able to report this in the Salisbury Independent yet in terms of what the future is going to be, because it is based on rumor. We're waiting to find out more from the university, but obviously the word is out there on the street. People are very concerned about this. But there's talk that the exhibits could move to the Salisbury University's building in downtown Salisbury, in the old Woolworths building that they have down there, and they would find another use for the building there on Shoemaker Pond. The university has come in and sort of bailed out the Ward Museum, I think a couple times now. I need to dig into that history. I can't remember all that happened, but you might remember 30 years ago they had the exhibit. The Ward's content was kept at Holloway Hall. Then they built the grand place there on the pond. But apparently it's going to be several $1 million to fix the problems that created the mold and to mitigate all that stuff. So the university is taking a look at this with this building, and something definitely is going to happen that's different.
Also, we got the Wicomico County School Board has begun its public hearings on its next budget. What are we looking at there?
Yeah, I haven't dug into the budget yet. I think it's a maintenance of effort budget. There will, as with these things always, there will be things that come up. There's a long way to go on this thing. There was a hearing last week. Not great attendance, not a lot of feedback in terms of the budget. But that's on my list to keep an eye on as we go through this budget. This would be Micah Stover, the new superintendent's first budget as superintendent. He was the finance director for a long time, so he's more than familiar with that. And we'll see how the newly elected people react to this. But right now, there don't seem to be a lot of concerns with this budget. And the capital aspect of it has been mostly solved in terms of what they're going to do with Mardella, the new Mardella school. Fruitland is next. Fruitland Primary is next on the rebuild list. So I'm looking for a calm budget situation with the school board.
Finally, Jack Heath was sworn in as mayor last week as replacing, of course, Jake Day. How was it? You went, right?
Yeah, I did. And I have to say that it was a much more emotional event than I would have thought. Normally these things you're kind of cynical and, whatever about it. But Jack really moved that room. He really did. He sincerely wants this job. I mean, he's been appointed to it. He might be the right man for the right time. My reaction this week, I reported his age wrong in the paper, and there were people who said I did that on purpose to make him seem younger than he is. He's 76. Somehow I typed the number 69 in my story, and I apologize for that. I don't know what I was thinking, but he is 76, so there's an age concern there. But Jack certainly has plenty of vitality. I don't see any issue with that. He's got a great staff, and you could just see in that room there are people who might not want to like the city. People in the county concerned about the future of the city, concerned about what life's going to be like without Jake Day. But Jack Heath did nothing to make anyone think that other than we're going to keep being progressive and doing a lot of new things. It was a very, very nice event.
We've been speaking with Greg Bassett. He's the editor and general manager of the Salisbury Independent, and we appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
Thanks, Don.
Delaware Governor John Carney has told state regulators to require all new passenger vehicles sold in the state to be electric by 2035, but that has caused some key Republican legislators to push back on the idea. Susan Canfor is a reporter for Coastal Point and a contributor to the Salisbury Independent. So, Susan, what's going on here?
Don, there's a debate that you might say is accelerating among Delaware lawmakers and the governor concerning these electric cars, or what are commonly called e-cars. Senator Gerald Hawker, who's a Republican, issued a statement after the governor's State of the State address last week, strongly disagreeing with Governor John Carney, who's a Democrat, and who wants to mandate electric cars. Of course, there's kind of a built-in division between these two men because they are of opposing parties. But Senator Hawker made some valid points, and fellow lawmakers, including Representative Ron Gray and Senator Brian Pettijohn, both well-known names in the Delaware legislature, and also both Republicans, agree with him. Senator Hawker is opposed to the governor, in conjunction with the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, moving ahead with a plan to adopt California's zero-emission standards. That means eventually 35% of new automobile stock at local dealerships would have to be electric by 2025. And 10 years later, by 2035, no new gas or diesel-powered vehicles that weigh 14,000 pounds or less could be sold in Delaware. The state's Department of Natural Resources, that everybody in Delaware calls DNREC, would implement the regulations. So the change to e-cars would not be done through legislation, and there would be no referendum for Delaware voters. The negative economic impact, Senator Hawker said, is hard to fathom. He's worried about local repair shops going out of business, and he said electric rates surely would go up, and there would be less fuel tax to feed the state's transportation trust fund. If that happened, fewer road improvements could be made. Buying new vehicles would be much more expensive because, he said, e-cars cost $10,000 more than the average automobile bought today. Replacement batteries can cost up to $16,000. And convenience stores that sell fuel, like Wawa and Royal Farms, would have to completely revamp their areas that sell fuel. With all of these concerns in mind, Senator Hawkers is asking constituents to email the governor and tell them, put the brakes on this plan. But Governor Carney continues to firmly stand by his support for e-cars. He joined with 23 other governors throughout the country in the U.S. Climate Alliance to support what they call the Clean Car Promise to protect residents from pollution and fuel costs. The governors in that alliance say a strong standard is in the best interest of consumers and even in the best interest of those who make vehicles. And it shows the world that America is a leader on transportation and environmental protection. They say they will not compromise on our responsibility to protect the health of our communities, our climate, and the savings consumers stand to gain at the pump. And they will continue to pursue additional concrete actions. So we'll see how this story develops, Don, and certainly there will be much more to come.
I understand that these limits that he's putting on in terms of e-cars, that these will not necessarily include things like buses, trucks, the heavy industry, that those are apparently more difficult to electrify than, say, passenger cars.
That's my understanding as well, but that could change in years to come. Right now the focus is on the ordinary cars and trucks that people like you and I buy to get back and forth to work every day.
Is there any sense about where Democrats in the state legislature are?
Where the Democrats generally are supporting the governor, and the Republicans are generally behind Senator Hawker. He's a very strong Republican. He's been a senator for many years, and he kind of leads the way, especially in this area. And all of the Republicans that I've talked to agree with him. Now, there are some more moderates, like Representative Gray is more moderate, and he says things like, well, maybe, we could have a choice, or maybe we could have a hybrid car. But Senator Hawker is very firmly, absolutely opposed to this entire plan.
How likely is this to be implemented? Or does anyone know?
I don't think anyone really knows yet, but if the governor has anything to do with it, it will be implemented. And the DNREC is behind it. DNREC, of course, is the Department of Natural Resources for the state. So because it's not going to be done through legislation, it would automatically be done as long as the governor and DNREC come up with regulations that they both agree on. And they're in this climate alliance as well, so they have the backing of more than half of the governors in the state. I think those governors in that alliance represent like 53%. I'm sorry, 53%. 53% of the governors in the state. So they have a majority. The majority of governors in the state are in favor of this.
In terms of, by the way, the state legislature is obviously dominated by Democrats. Any likelihood they might push back on it, or is this something that Carney, you think, is going to have a free ride on in terms of going through?
I don't see the Democrats pushing back on it, not the ones I've talked to, at least not yet. Now, maybe as they consider Senator Hawker's concerns, or maybe as they talk to each other and it gets closer, you might see something. But I don't see anything yet. Right now, they're all They're all behind. The ones that I've talked to, at least, are all behind the governor. I haven't seen any pushback yet.
So is it likely that we're going to get it by 2035? I mean,
It looks like it. It looks like it. The concern, of course, is the expense. And, like Senator Hawker said, these gas stations and convenience stores would have to completely change. But you see them little by little. You see them putting in these chargers. Wawa has them. I see them where I live in the Ocean City. And a lot of these stores are already putting in chargers in Maryland. So maybe they're, nationwide, they're slowly getting used to the idea. But it looks like in Delaware, that's exactly what's going to happen. Now, this is Carney's last term. He's in his second year of his 4-year term. So a new governor could say, no, we don't want this. But right now, it's moving ahead.
We've been speaking with Susan Canfor. She's a reporter for Coastal Point and also contributor to the Salisbury Independent. Appreciate you chatting with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Don.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Last week, 5 Memphis police officers were charged with the beating death of Tyree Nichols after a traffic stop for alleged reckless driving. Video footage that has now been seen nationwide shows the officers kicking and punching Nichols in addition to hitting him with batons. They've been charged with second-degree murder. All 5 of the officers were African American. Meanwhile, 3 firefighters were also fired. No criminal charges have been filed against them. In the video, it takes some 28 minutes before a stretcher is provided for Nichols. Earlier this week, we talked with Charlotte King. She is the founder of the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice about the beating and the death of Tyree Nichols.
It reinforces the whole need for the country, and the country, unfortunately, since it's so divided, is not going to do it, to take a look at our law enforcement system, regardless of what state it's in. I mean, these men could not have been acting under the guidelines of whatever their training has taught them. It's ominous. It's scary to think even the people who are hired to keep people secure, to keep communities secure, are as murderous, are as out of control as the citizens that they are there to restrain. I mean, so for an old lady like me, or for anybody, younger people think to say, where can you feel safe? Not with the police who chase you down and beat you to the point where you die. I mean, where can you look and say, here is a safe arm, here is one of the benefits of a democracy? Because that certainly was no different than the Taliban catching somebody and cutting off their head, which is the point America always misses. We are no better than those people that we keep trying to say are terrible.
What do you make of the fact that the officers were African American, and what does that say then about the system that they're working inside, or the culture that they're working on inside, that gave them this sense that they could do this?
That's the one I struggle with. I don't know. I mean, certainly for me, if I was a white policeman, it would certainly say to me, oh, well, they're not going to focus on racism in terms of our bad behavior, because, look, black cops do it also. I think that we got to be more careful about who we hire to be policemen, whether they're black or white. Because I think that there is a great sense of uncontrolled power in any policeman, black or white, that allows them to feel that they have the power of God to determine who lives and who dies.
I mean, what else? Yeah, go ahead.
And that's not something I've ever heard anyone talk about. Who do you give that authority to? Once in my life, I had the ability to have tremendous power. It only lasted for a day, but you know what made me stop? The realization that, oh my God, what damage I could do. What damage I can do. I've got all this immediate power. And I stopped. And I don't think we realize that you've got to be real careful who you allow.
One of the things that struck me, by the way, about this unit was that it was supposed to be part of this effort to suppress crime. It's apparently now been disbanded, but it seemed like an odd thing for them to do if they were all just simply about suppressing crime in general.
A very odd thing. And what were they doing it for? Were they intent on killing him? He was already restrained, so let's not talk about restraint. So why did they keep beating on them? Someone said, "Oh, it was because of their own frustration." I don't buy that. I think it's because it was okay to do it. It was maybe it was a way to let out your own frustrations. Every group needs somebody who's less powerless. We say, white folks have to keep black folks powerless. Well, maybe the black policeman has to keep a group oppressed. I don't know. And they say we're not going to take it out. Would they have done that? Would they have done that to a white citizen? A young white man who was unarmed, who from his picture looked like he was scrawny enough that any one of them could have taken him down. But they not only took him down, they tortured him. Where did torture come in?
What do you make of
Now, the difference, one of the differences is, what would happen if these were five white cops? These 5 men lost their jobs in 2 seconds. The man involved with George Floyd and the cops who looked on, they were suspended. They didn't lose their job. And that was witnessed by what? How many millions around the world? So I hope those 5 black men realize no matter how much you think you're being as big as bold as those white cops, you are still just black. And so you lost your jobs in a second. I don't think white cops would have lost their job in a second. Because they didn't in the most dastardly crime we've had in this country, which is the killing of George Floyd.
What did you make of their appearance after the beating, in which there's the videos and they're sort of talking to one another, obviously talking about this claim that he was reaching for the gun and so on, but there just seemed to be this atmosphere of relief, and it took a long time actually for some kind of medical assistance to come along. But they just sort of stood around.
Right. Well, so did the police in that last school shooting, who stood around while they could hear the man inside killing those little kids. They're standing around saying, "What do we do next?" And I mean, what is the policeman's commitment or law enforcement's commitment to saving lives? There doesn't seem to be any. They seem to be as lethargic as the rest of the world. Congress is interested in fighting each other for what? Power. Nothing in any discussion deals with how do you help American citizens rise out of poverty, find housing, do better with criminal justice. It's all about the individual. We've turned democracy into a weapon, and we put it in the hands of unevolved people. I'm hopeful because I know that the real problem is humans are unevolved. And so, like every other species, they fight for power and control. But it has nothing to do with the community. It has nothing to do with the real mission of what they do. And this may not be pertinent to your article or your interview, but it saddens me that you can't even depend on the one group. I would love to think that if I'm in trouble, I can call the police. I called the police when my house was vandalized, remember? And what did they do when they got here? They said, "Oh, I don't see the word Trump on your lawn." They refused to see the problem.
What do you make of this issue of qualified immunity? I think you mentioned a moment ago, and have not, at least, dealt with that in the state of Delaware.
They haven't dealt with it in the state of Delaware, and yet, if you're a doctor and you touch one of your patients inappropriately, you're out. If you're a teacher and you touch a child inappropriately, you're out. And yet policemen can do anything under this qualified immunity. You can't trust. I mean, how would you ever give a human being that much authority that you don't give to other professionals? Can you think of any group of professionals who have acquired immunity? And why not? Why isn't the teacher Why don't we give teachers a qualified immunity? Why don't we give doctors qualified immunity or nurses? But we don't.
Why do you think Delaware hasn't
Or
done that?
politicians. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Why do you think Delaware hasn't done that? Gotten rid of it or modified it some way?
Well, of course, there's the power of the law enforcement unions and their lobbyists. And there is just, I don't think the broad picture is seen by anyone in Delaware, the long-term picture. We work in this county on the immediate. Well, let's keep the status quo. But they're adamant about giving them this acquired immunity without looking at the ramifications of giving any individual. It's like saying, we give you the ability to kill and not hold you accountable. If you gave me that ability, and I'm a very sane person, but if you gave me that ability, I think I could abuse it. I would feel so powerful that I could abuse it. And I think that's what we're missing. Everyone needs some amount of control.
Do you think that there's something almost inherent in policing in the sense that the police see themselves on one side and then there are civilians on the other? That there is this social and cultural and separation between them and the people they are dealing with, and ultimately, because as you say, they have so much power, that they don't view the community as part of them.
Right. They don't see the community as part of them, but there's still something, and I don't know what the missing element is. I mean, you can say a governor doesn't take advantage of his role to oppress a community. What he does is he ignores the community because he wants the votes. Now, policemen aren't dependent on votes, so maybe it's a poor comparison. But yes, there is something about the relationship between communities and law enforcement, and I've seen it work well down here. I've seen police chiefs sit down with communities and try to develop a relationship with those communities and try to build up that trust. And try not to start off by saying, that's the black community, so everyone is bad. That's the black community, so everyone's on drugs. And of course, as long as you put it down there, you don't have to look for the real criminal who brings drugs into those communities. And in the end, it all boils down to money, doesn't it? I mean, wasn't I surprised to find out in a book written about the black and the blue, or the blue and whatever, that we had a town hall on once, to find out that Chicago was dependent on the search and seizures and the incarceration of people because it made millions. It made millions. And the what do they call where you get money?
Some kind of federal funds, or
no? The individual when he wants to get out.
Fines and then they also have to pay for certain things that go along with court documents. And I mean, there's a whole slew actually.
Yeah, there's a whole fortune. I mean, don't forget in Delaware, we're charging our incarcerated people $5 a phone call. You don't pay $5 a phone call. I don't pay $5 a phone call. Why would you charge a prisoner who has no source of income $5 a phone call? It's all about money. The greatest drug in this country is not crack. It's not heroin. It's not fentanyl. It is money. It is money. Chicago raised millions. New York raised millions. That's the incentive. How many search and seizures can you do? How many fines can you give for people who are illegally parked? I mean, and cops are encouraged to do that.
And this is a result.
If you read some of the literature, it's become a money-making venture, especially during that period when if you arrested a drug, somebody involved in drugs, you are able to take their property and cash in that property to use for your particular precinct. It's all about money, and it's blinding. Because money as a drug is a soothing, comforting. It's not like fentanyl, which will kill you, or heroin, which will eat up your kidneys. Money, it's comfortable.
What do you think?
And nobody wants to look at it. They think when I say money is the greatest drug, people look at me like I'm crazy. But it is.
I think that's true. Well, I mean, they allegedly stopped him because he was driving recklessly. Whatever.
And that's fine, and they should have stopped him because he could have killed somebody. That's fine.
Yeah.
But and then what happened? Did he jump out of the car? I did not look at the film. Because one of the channels, I think it was CNN, said, don't look at it. It's too terrible. So I thought, since I'm mad at the country at this point anyway, let me not get madder. So I didn't look at it.
I saw parts of it. It's just very strange to see it. I compare it to, say, for instance, the videos that we saw with Rodney King, and although this seemed much more vicious than Rodney.
Right, which tells you something. Our violence has increased. And that's what's so scary. Like, the people in Delaware are stupid enough, or maybe even in Maryland, in Salisbury, to say, oh, it'll never happen here. How naive we are. How very naive. Of course it'll happen here. But we say it won't.
All right.
And yet we underplayed the black man who was killed in Dewey. Just got off.
Yes, it is.
Right. And we heard so little about that. First I heard he was killed. Then I tried to reach his family to find out what was happening. Couldn't reach them. The next thing I know, then I heard nothing, and now I heard in this weekend's paper that the cops got off. It was justifiable. Killing somebody by shooting them in the back is never justifiable, especially since you are a well-trained law enforcement person. You and I aren't, Don. We're not trained. But you're talking about men who, when they're not out there fighting crime, are in training. And they always think they see a gun. And in this instance, what gun did they see from this man that they kicked to death and lasered to death and jumped on his head? I mean, what could have been in their mind? 5 of them. It took 5 of them. They should realize how little they are in terms of being humans. That would take 5 of them to bring down one little skinny man.
Charlotte King, founder of the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, on the beating death of Tyree Nichols by Memphis police officers. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.